Hey guys, before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to give you a heads up. It's a little wonky. We are going to start out this podcast with a bit of a video recording from Ruth, and then we are going to go into an audio recording from Ruth. This is the first episode that I have ever done where I had absolutely terrible technical difficulties, and I feel like that is for a purpose. This is by far the most important episode I have done so far. The information that Ruth has to tell you guys, the stories that she has to tell you guys, and her own personal testimony is so powerful and such a testament to how strong God's power is against the devil that I truly feel like this episode was under attack in certain aspects. So just so you guys know, please, no matter the technical difficulties, listen to this episode. It is worth listening to. This is Let's Talk, episode 26. Let's talk about human trafficking. Welcome back to Let's Talk. Let's Talk episode 26. Let's talk about human trafficking. Now, for obvious reasons, just from the title, this is going to be a very serious episode. And, we're going to get into a lot of different topics and a lot of different stories. And so I just wanted to prepare you for that. And my guest today is Ruth. Now, I was first introduced to Ruth 6 or 7 years ago. I was a part of a theater troupe, and I actually was the one that invited you on to talk to our theater group, and the talk stuck with me for 6 and 7 years past that, and all of the work that she has done. And so going into that a little bit, I'll intro you a little bit. Ruth has worked in human services since 1984, and she is currently working as a student services specialist / school social worker after working 2 years with PLAEA as a behavior interventionist and a school social worker. Before that, Ruth worked for 37 years in various roles in the behavioral mental health system, in office and at home, with programs focused on youth advocacy, foster care, adoption, and human trafficking intervention. Ruth, it is an absolute honor to have you on. If there's anything that I missed or anything that you want to say before we get started, now would be the time.
Nope, we're good. Let's get started.
All right. So, what is your definition of human trafficking?
To me, human trafficking is anytime somebody uses a third person, okay, differentiate from pimping or from prostitution, okay. Prostitution is where one person sells themselves to another person and they get the goods or services. So it's a two-party transaction. Human trafficking is where there's a broker that benefits from that service. So if a third party benefits, they collect any of the goods, the services, the money, they benefit from the buying, selling of another person's body, you have human trafficking. So I look at that definition.
So what is the difference between human trafficking and sex trafficking? Because, when you're Googling it or you're looking it up, they usually come up as two separate things. So what is the main difference between the two?
Sex trafficking is where you're selling basically sex, where human trafficking could be you're selling labor, you're selling organs, you're selling, and I hate to say organs, but that happens here in Iowa. You might be selling sperm, you might be selling eggs, you might be selling babies, you might be selling, like we have boys and girls that will sell their, like a testes is worth $35,000. So you only need one. So somebody might sell their testes. You see what I mean? So you can be trafficked. Somebody could do that to you. And yes, you hear those stories. Like I went to a party. I woke up 3 days later and I only had one testes when I woke up.
Wow.
Okay. I've heard that story. And you go, oh, okay. And chances are somebody sold that testes to somebody who needed a healthy testes. Okay? Could be kidney, could be something else. And you think, that's not your average human trafficker. Okay? Because that takes some medical expertise to remove, Okay? You could sell somebody for labor. They could be a maid service and you could underpay them. You could have labor trafficking, and of course, we're in an egg state. You could underpay somebody or overcharge somebody and say, in the chicken industry, in the pork industry, in the cattle industry, by saying, I brought you into this country. You and 18 other people are going to live in this one farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, and you and your children are going to work for me for $1 an hour and that house. And, you know, that's a form of trafficking, because that's not a fair labor, that's not a fair wage. And you've got kids that are working, you've got, it's just, there can be so many different forms of human trafficking that people a lot of times will recognize it and say something's wrong with that, but they won't identify it as that's trafficking. Okay, so we tried to call it then modern day slavery. Well, people want to say slavery disappeared in the 1860s. No, it didn't. It just transitioned into a new look. But people making money off the backs of other people, or off the backs of other people's labor. Okay, so some people would say it's a form of capitalism. But if the person that you're making money off of isn't adequately reimbursed, or they are forced, fraud, or coercion is used to keep them in that trade, you have human trafficking. That's based on our legal definitions.
And so, where did, obviously, you have worked in this, field? Maybe, I guess, I don't know if that's the right word, but this field for a while. So, talk to me about where your passion for this came from. Because obviously, kids aren't growing up thinking, when I grow up one day, this is what I want to do, And I feel like a lot of people get really sad when they hear about this. So, how did you hear about this and go, you know what, that's where I need to be?
I came in the back door. So I was a licensed foster parent, which is the love of my life. I love helping reunify families. And so um, we, being the helping side of the system as a foster parent, would have kids placed in our home. And when they develop trust and they start sharing their stories or things that had happened to them in their life, a lot of times it would come out and they'd be sitting at our table, and all at once they'd say, this happened to me or that happened to me, or they'd be talking and this person did this to me or this person did that or made me do this. And then they collected money for it, and you'd be sitting there and going, wait a second. And that's how we would learn. And putting 2 and 2 and 2 together and getting to 6, we would find out that's trafficking. And we, as the foster parents, would be the ones telling the Department of Human Services or the therapist or the family sometimes, because it isn't always the family that's trafficking them. Sometimes it's the aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, people down the road, other people outside of that family, whoever, unsafe people that are preying on those children that are now in foster care. And you'd be like, I thought they were safe people, but they're not, because they were using those kids in different ways, and we're just now learning about it. So we came into it kind of by having kids placed. Well, they were placed with us because of unsafe conditions at home. Well, they were removed from their homes, maybe due to lack of critical care or drugs in the home or parents being incarcerated or a death in the family or whatever the reason for removal. That was one entity. But then as you put pieces together, you got the rest of the story. And so we happened to have a child in our home, and when she was placed, they said, well, Ruth, she's got some background. She was a runaway. There was a lot of abuse in the background, blah, blah, blah. And the whole story wasn't out there. And then after she'd lived with us for about 7 months, I received a telephone call, and it was a man on the phone who asked for her by her first and last name. And we don't use last names in foster care. And I am that mother lion. I am going to guard my children and everybody else's children like nobody's business. You don't mess with me. And so I said, who are you? And he wouldn't answer me. So he got treated like I treat telemarketers. And click, you're gone. And the phone rang about 10 minutes later. Well, in the meantime, this young lady walked through and I said, have you used your last name anyplace? And she's like, absolutely not. And I'm like, somebody knows you. And so the phone rings and it's a woman on the phone, asked for the same child, first and last name. Said, who are you? And she said, you're the foster parent. And I said, I am a foster parent. And she says, do you know why this young lady's in foster care? And I'm like, who are you? And she says, ma'am, I'm an attorney in Cook County, Illinois. And then she went on to say, this young lady has been trafficked. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. Long story short, nobody had called it that. And I'm your typical Iowan that gives money every week in the offering tray, and I support kids in third world countries who have been trafficked, because in my head, that's where trafficking happened, to poor families in third world countries who sold their children because they couldn't afford it. I had every stereotype until it was in my home and in my family, and it was a child I loved. And I went, oh, wait a second. And that's the phone call that triggered the conversation, that triggered her sitting down and saying, this is my background. And I said, Iowa has to know. In these conversations between her and this attorney and that man that called, he was the undercover cop that pulled her out. So I did have to go back and eat crow and apologize for treating him poorly. Okay? But you know what I mean? I did. I had to apologize, but I said, don't you ever call my house and ask for somebody and not identify yourself, buddy. Okay? But, I had to make amends with him. But he, we decided, because she was asked to come and testify against her pimp. They went through 9 names that this gentleman used as aliases before she said, that's my pimp. But those were his aliases. Those were all his names. And we put these stories together. Well, to educate here in Iowa, she started telling her story. Okay? The more she told this story to teenagers, to adults, to social service organizations, to the Lions Club, to the Rotary, to the Kiwanis, to any church group that would listen, the more she talked, the more people said, me too, me too, me too. That's my story. How did she know? That happened to me too. And pretty soon, we were seeing how many youth in Iowa identified with this 14, now 15-year-old girl that said, how did she know that happened to me? And that's when we started saying, Iowans have to be educated to know trafficking isn't in third world countries. It's here. It doesn't look like it does in third world countries. It looks different. And this is how they pull people in. So we started collecting the stories, taking the information and sharing it with permission. And that became my job, getting the permission, sharing the stories to keep the survivors. And sometimes these boys and girls were still being victimized, to keep them safe and still hidden. Okay. I would share their stories for educational purposes so that moms and dads, aunties and uncles, grandpas and grandmas could intervene and keep their children safer by being aware.
And so you talked about, people of all ages being trafficked. Can you I'm curious, what is the youngest age that you have heard a story of, or maybe even, witnessed and brought out of a child being trafficked?
The youngest I have worked with was 4 months old when she was trafficked.
Wow.
The oldest I have worked with was 72, and in her telling of her story, she was trafficked beside an 80-something-year-old person.
Wow.
And they were still being pimped out because people's sexual preferences, this is a buyer-driven market. You do not buy what you have at home. You buy something novel. If you're paying that kind of money, you're paying for the fantasy, you're paying for the story, you're paying for the novelty. So you're willing to pay big money for something you don't have at home. And so people will pay for that novel experience. So when people say, I'm too old for this or I'm too old for that, don't you believe it.
And so, I mean, that's awful to hear. I have a daughter of my own. She is almost 1.5. And so hearing that and remembering my daughter at 4 months old and hearing that just absolutely tears me apart. And so 6 years ago, you came to a theater event that I was at to discuss your work. And there were two things, like during that talk, that, like I told you before we even started recording, that stuck out to me and stood with me my whole life. And I feel like that's the important part, is not only did it stick out to me then, it stuck with me. And the first being was, at the time you said that women were actually the higher percentage of human, and I can't remember if it was human and sexual traffickers or just human traffickers, whichever one. Is that still true? And why do you think that women were in a higher number? Because I feel like people see men as the hunters. They see men as the aggressors. And maybe that's the answer to my own question, is that women come off a little bit better. They seem a little bit more welcoming, and so they have a little bit more success. But why don't you talk about a little bit why women are a higher percentage, more in your own words?
That is from the stories that I have gathered. So over the years, I have interviewed, worked with, intervened with over 230 victims of human trafficking. And most of them will say they have had more females that have pimped them out than they have had men. Now, there's both men and women can pimp you. There might be a head pimp, okay? There might be somebody, I'll use Daddy Warbucks. They're up at the top. There might be somebody up there that's male. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the direct people running them or working them, they've had more females. And that's what they'll say is, and the females that are there running them, because the females can be sold beside them. The females know how to manipulate them. They know how to hurt them better. They know how to bribe them better. Men use physical force. They might beat you up, they might threaten you. But women typically get women to do what they want to do using whatever it is. So it's just been, the people that I've interviewed say that they would rather have a male pimp because they're less scary than the female pimps. The female pimp are more violent, more vicious, more hurtful. That isn't to say that male pimps are kind. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying that from those I've interviewed, they have been run by more females. I know I've got a few victims that'll tell you they feel like they've been run by the devil himself, and that, they've experienced every kind of abuse from male pimps, including watching people be killed in order for them to be kept silent. So you hear these stories. I can't prove any of them, and I would never say they're lying, because it's their journey, it's their story, it's their message, and what they've seen that keeps them silent or keeps them in the life. Who am I to say what's right or what's wrong or what's real or what's not? Because when you stop and think, if you were a pimp and you wanted to turn somebody against heroes, so think about who you might deem a hero. For me, police officers are heroes. Okay, so I'm going to use this as my analogy. I know some good cops. I know some dirty cops, but I know some good cops. So let's say I, as a pimp, want to turn my stable against cops, so they never go to a cop. I'm going to hire some cops or hire some men and women to dress up like police officers, and I am going to have them buy, use, and abuse my stable until they have bought, used, and abused my stable so badly that my stable will never run to a cop for help. That's how you turn people against a group of people. You know? And I always think it's real easy to manipulate people like that. Dress them up in costumes, put them in fake uniform. You know what I mean? It's easy. You know, if you want to turn them against medical providers, dress them up as doctors and nurses, and then have them be abusive. Then nobody wants to go back to them, right? Now, are they really doctors and nurses? I don't know. But we've had some doctors and nurses that have been identified as being in the life, and it's real easy to blackmail somebody into the life and have them in the life doing their professional job for a pimp, because a pimp can get you entrapped or ensnared in their world the same way they can ensnare a victim. They can ensnare a professional and hold you in that life doing the work that you normally do. So if I'm a pimp, I need victims that I can sell. But I also need attorneys that are going to help me get LLCs, get real estate, invest my money, launder my money, keep me out of legal trouble, buy houses that I can run people through. Maybe if I have boys and girls, you know, maybe they're going to sell organs, you know, or sperm or eggs for me. They're going to have to broker those deals or write those legal contracts. Or if somebody gets pregnant, maybe they're going to have to handle those adoptions. And those adoptions and charge those families, well, that money's going to come back into my organization. I'm going to need attorneys that are going to do that. I'm going to need doctors and nurses to keep my stable of boys and girls, men and women, clean from diseases, keep them healthy. So they're going to have to do the medical end of all of those services. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm going to need to own these people. I'm not going to want to pay these people, but I will pay what they need. So the easiest way is for me to either offer them free services, which I could do, or to blackmail them, find some dirt on them, have them step out on their spouse, catch them, and then hold that over them for years to come while I get them, you know, to jump the hoops that I want them to do. So the same kind of force, fraud, and coercion that I, the pimp, use to manipulate my victims, I use to manipulate the people that are working for me. I use that same kind of junk to keep my buyers coming back to buy. Hey, you've bought from me before. I videotaped you buying and raping this young person. If you don't keep buying from me, I'm going to show your wife, your husband, your boss, your career. I'm going to ruin you, whatever. So, you know, these people, once you slide down that slippery slope into this life, they've got you. And I don't feel sorry for you, you know, as the buyer or as the professional. Do you see what I mean? But I'm saying they get you. They get video of you. They get photographs of you. They hold you there.
And I'm curious to know, you know, you're talking about interviewing people who have come out of being trafficked. I'm curious to know if you've ever interviewed somebody like a former pimp or somebody who's, you know, been in on the inside of these meetings, but from the other point of view.
I have interviewed people who have said, I have brought people into the life. Yes. I have delivered people who have been sold. they usually are also in the life. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they too are for sale. I have not sat knee to knee with somebody that said, I am a pimp and I've never been for sale.
Wow.
I have not had that. Everybody that I've interviewed has been, this is the life I know. I too am for sale. I have been sold. I know this life. And, you know, it's just a little sex, Ruth. What's the big deal?
And do you find that usually those are the same people who have kind of grown up in that, you know what I'm saying, versus then that's kind of all that they know and understand?
I don't know if they've grown up or if they think that they can stop it when they want to stop it, or if they think that it's easier than punching a time clock or than answering to a boss. I don't really know what their thinking is that keeps them in the life. For me, if they're an adult and they choose this life, I leave it alone. I don't ask to help them. If they ask me for help, I will help. But I don't say, oh, I need to get you out, because who am I to decide their life? If they are a child, if they are under the age of 18 and somebody is using them, I'm going to fight for them, because I don't believe that children have the capacity yet to decide that this is their choice in life. I want them to be able to grow up and have all of the options of all of the careers at their fingertips before they choose the life.
And the second thing that stood out to me when you came and talked to that theater group all those years ago was that you had fostered and adopted 8 children out of human trafficking, and that you've parented over 100 youth and adopted 18 youth into your family. Can you touch on that, but also touch on the idea of bringing a child who has been trafficked into your family? Because I feel like that can't be an easy transition.
Yes, I have done those things, and I'm very proud of those kids, and they are all mine. And I share them with their families when they have families that are safe and sound for them, and love them to pieces. When my family, so, you know, I have birth children, and when we decide, and I say we because it was a family decision, when we decided to become a foster family, it was just my spouse and I, and we're no longer together. But we decided we wanted to foster before we ever had children of our own. So our children were born into a family that fostered already. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And there were people that were very judgmental and say, how could you do that? You know, you're raising kids with all that chaos and all that disruption. And people were very judgmental. You know how people get. And yet, all 4 of my birth children are adults now, and they're incredible adults, and they love and accept. They know how to work with, and they can live with, and they are heroes of their own right today. Okay? So I have no regrets about what they experienced or lived through, or the children that we brought in. They learned life, but they learned that not everybody has it the same or it equal. And their brothers and sisters that they have received over the years, because some got adopted, some went back home to their families, some stay connected very tightly to us, so we became extended families to their families, and some we had for a while and we haven't heard from since. You know, and I've buried 3. So wow. 3 of the children that I've parented in those 37 years, I've also visit graves. And so you think we have those life experiences as a family. So I would say You learn to love, you learn to let go, and you learn that everybody is in your life for a season, and they teach you things. And you carry, just like my messages stayed with you, their messages to me as a parent made me a better parent. Their lessons to us as a family. A lot of times we'll sit around when we're just talking and be like, remember this, kid? Yeah, I learned this and I learned that, or I became better at this, or they taught me this, and man, I'll never do that again. Or, you know, we all have that. And whether they are birth, foster, or adoptive, each and every one of them carries such a special gift that they provide to life. You know what I mean? That all I can say is, I think I'm probably the most blessed human on the planet. And yep, I'm a little biased, but you just do it. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Are there days that I just want to cry? Yeah. And does it end when they're 18 or when they leave? No, it doesn't. And some days, you know, you still get that call that they're suicidal, or that they don't want life to go on, or that some wackadoodle landlord is going to try and evict them today because they can't pay their rent, because they had to buy diapers and formula, and their paycheck wasn't enough, and the landlords don't understand, and everybody wants their money, and the world is a tough place, and work is hard, and adulting is harder. And every family has this. We're no different than anybody else. We're just bigger. And so I don't know that I can say it's harder or easier than anything else. Bringing them in, we surrounded them with people just like them and said, your story is special, but it's not unique. We're all here, and we all have a story. You're special, but you're not unique. And we're here we do this together. So I would tell you that all of the kids who have been in my life know that they're part of a bigger whole, and they're unique, or they're special, but they're part of that big mass. And they've got, I never wanted somebody to look and say, I get to be a victim and I get to think like a victim because boo-boo me, I'm in foster care. I don't accept that. I don't, because some kids didn't get the gift of foster care. And, my kids didn't. Got the gift of foster care. Some of them got the gift of going home. Some of them got the gift of adoption. All of them got the gift of more people loving them. And I guess I just look at the world that way. It takes a village, and man, the more people that you can love on a child, the better that child gets.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the details of trafficking, because I feel like sometimes people don't know how to identify certain things, or what should I be looking out for. So for parents out there, what is the most common way that children are trafficked? And when I say children, I'm talking about 18 or under. So this could be little kiddos. This could also be kids in high school as well.
Most kids are sex trafficked. They're trafficked for their bodies, for sex purposes. And so they're used sexually. Usually starts with pictures. Send me pictures of you. And if somebody can get them to send a picture, it's a slippery slope. They don't even have to be in a bikini. They don't even have to be naked, because you can Photoshop anybody's body, and you can blackmail that child into doing more, meeting you. If you don't send me money, I'm going to do this. If you don't do this, I'm going to say this is you. I'm going to say that's you. I'm going to ruin your college chances. I'm going to say, this, that, and the other about you if you don't do these things for me. So I try and warn parents about the internet. That's how they're going to get to your kids. Be very hyper vigilant about knowing who your kids' friends are. And I'll say that, don't let everybody be your friend. They don't need to have access to you. Don't tell everybody your favorite things or the things that you're most scared of. Keep some of your things private. People don't have to have access to you 24/7. Your telephone doesn't need to go to bed with you. Put some boundaries in there. And I say to parents, teach them it's okay to not share, that they don't have to, be everything to everybody, because the world is really quick to use people up. And, that's one of the things that, when you think about what children are targeted for, they're not always looking. Like, the stereotype is, I'm looking for the weak, shy child that's an easy victim.
Mm-hmm.
Stop and think about who's an easy victim. Who's easy to blackmail? The easiest people to blackmail are the ones who have something to lose. Okay? So, if you think of it that way, what do people have to lose? What would they protect? Some people are going to protect their name. Some people are going to protect their home. Some people are going to protect their reputation. Some people are going to protect their cars, their money, their status. Now, get into these smaller towns and these smaller communities and apply that thinking. That changes who me, the pimp, is going to go for. If I was a pimp, I'm not going to go for the one. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm going to go for one that's going to jump my hoops. So that's where people have to stop thinking, like, oh, it's just the poor people, or, oh, it's just these people that live in the trailer courts, or whatever their weird stereotypes are. They're going to go for the kids that maybe are sneaking out, maybe are the risk takers, maybe they've partied too much, maybe they've taken some risky chances. If they've done something that somebody can use against them, that ability to be blackmailed is all a pimp needs to take it one step further and get that person lured in to the life. And that's the risk. So when I talk to parents and grandparents, I say, teach your kids, the minute somebody tries to say, you do this, or I tell blah, 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 tell your kid, you tell them to go tell, and a kid go tell on themselves. That's the slippery slope. We have to somehow empower our kids. Do you. But the minute somebody tries to blackmail you or gives you an ultimatum, you get home first. You tell on you first. You guard you first. Don't let anybody blackmail you, because that's that slope.
And so, and speaking of partying, one of the things that I remember also from when you came and talked was you used this example, and I don't know if I'll get this 100% right, but it was a way that children or maybe an older child can kind of traffic another child by, inviting them to a party, for example, or like getting to know them, and then kind of they invite them to this party, and then sometimes the child never makes it back home because they're trafficked and brought away, or sometimes something happens at that party and they're trafficked. Does this example sound familiar? And if so, can you kind of go into that a little bit as well? Because I feel like that's something that people would see is parents naturally want their children to make friends and, be social and be engaging, and maybe kind of go into this example and talking about things to kind of look out for.
Yep. And that example happens very frequently. So if I'm in the life and I want a night off, okay, or there's going to be too many people at this party and I know I can't service all of them, I'm challenged by my pimp to bring in my friends. And so I invite my friends in, and it's like, oh, come with me. And I'm going to say, oh, let's go get our nails done. Let's go get a pedicure. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. And then I get my friends in a car, and then I'm like, oh, we've got to stop here first. And then we stopped there. Well, where we're stopping is really where my pimp has it set up where we have to service people. Okay. And where we stop, I say something along the lines of, I'm only going to run in here. You guys can come on in with me. That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, just run in. I've got to drop this off or pick something up or whatever. And then I go up and then I'm like, come on up and say hi. And then we go up and then pretty soon we're outnumbered, or there's drinks around, or there's smokes around, or something's around that maybe takes us a little bit out of our comfort zone, or maybe it's a date rape drug, or maybe it's something that kind of relaxes you a little bit too far, and pretty soon you're in a situation and there's videotapes or there's cameras. There's always cameras, and you're shown doing something that you're not proud of, and that's used against you. I'm going to show this to your mom, your dad, your grandpa, your grandma, your whoever you value, if you don't show up for the next party, or if you don't do this. Now, they might do it a few times innocently. Like, maybe that's a dry run, and nothing happens the first time, the second time, the third time. But it won't be very long before it's happening regularly. And then it's a slippery slope. Again, a lot of times it's the viewing the first one or two times, and the people where the house you show up will look over your friends and then say, bring friend A and friend D back. We like their look, but don't bring the others back.
Wow.
Those are the ones they want to bring into the stable because they think they'll be bought. The buyers will like them better. So, yeah, it's a market, but it's how somebody that's in the life gets a night off, or they work their way up the chain of command, so to speak, by bringing more people into the life, by inviting them to a party or a tailgate or a bonfire or come over to this person's house or that person's house. So in these small towns on Thursday night where they have the big bonfires before the big Friday night football games, and they go to this person's house or that person's house, I say to people, are the parents there? Are their parents present? Do you have parents? Make sure lots of parents are around. Don't go to those bonfires if you don't know that parents are there, because a lot of times that's where there's some, we call it seasoning, they're being seasoned. They're being brought in, they're being looked at, they're being tested.
Would you say that the rise of, like AI is a really big thing right now, things like OnlyFans are a really big thing right now, and when I first heard you talk a while ago, those weren't really on anybody's radar. Like OnlyFans wasn't really a thing, AI wasn't really a thing, but obviously now it's like super huge. Would you say that those things are bringing up more cases of trafficking, that it's kind of making it easier? Like, how does that impact this field?
I would say it's only going to make it easier and worse, but I am not an expert in those areas, so I don't have a really good answer for that. But anything that makes it easier to hide in plain sight, or to make things kind of like smoke and mirrors, which is what to me AI is. Smoke and mirrors. Is that real? Is that not real? Is that legit? Is that not? Man, that's only going to make this that much harder for the heroes to track, find, and hold accountable. And let's face it, this is hard enough for interdiction to work, because the whole world of human trafficking is set up on lies. So if I'm a good pimp, I am going to teach you in my stable never to look at me, never call me by my name. I'm going to change my name or go by 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 different names. I'm going to have IDs in different names. I'm going to go by nicknames. So in this town, I might be this name, in that town, another name, in that town, a third name, in that town, a fourth name. So that anybody talking about me is never talking about the same person, okay? So that so that the stories never really ever line up and match, so that anybody talking looks crazy, or anybody talking looks like they can't get their story straight. Okay? Because it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all lies. You can't tell the same story twice if the lies are so present. Yeah, we were at a Days Inn, and then you look up, no, it was a Comfort Inn. Well, no, it wasn't. It was because the stories changed, because we've changed the sign 15 times, or we say we're here, but then I told the story 5 more times, or I changed the city 3 more times, or I drugged you when you were in the car. I told you we were in this city, but we were really in this other city. And if you never saw where we were at, how would you really know? Because it's hard for an officer then who says, well, where were you? What room? You don't know, because you can't put those pieces together. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
That's the world that these people are raised in. So then when they go to tell their story, they can't get it. Add to that the trauma brain, okay, which doesn't let you tell a sequential story, okay? You put all of that together, and everybody listening to that story says, that doesn't make any sense at all. That's trackable. So then they disqualify that person as a witness. That case gets thrown out, and that trafficker walks, or that buyer never gets charged, because of all the smoke and mirrors, all the lies, and all the facts that can't be fact checked, because of all of the data that never lines up. A to B, B to C, D to, it just never fits. And even to this day, I've lived with my kids for years now. If I went back and said, tell me your stories, start to finish, not one of my children could tell me the same story, start to finish. Because even as their brains heal, as they go into adulthood, there are parts they remember and parts they forget. And they're going to naturally put things in or leave things out. No one tells the same story identically. It's just part of our oral language. And so, it's just part of that scenario that works to the advantage of the pimps and the buyers, and it works against our heroes, our legal system, our people doing interdiction work, all of that, and it makes their job a nightmare.
And so when we kind of talked about common ways for children. What are some of the common ways for adults to be trafficked? Because I think you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier too, you know, you're like, oh, I'm an adult. Like, I can notice things. There's no way that this is going to happen to me, but obviously it does. So what are some of the most common ways that we see that?
For adults, they can be most common in Iowa. We've got more labor trafficking cases than we have sex trafficking cases, but I'm going to tell you that's just how many have been charged. Because I'm still going to tell you I think there's more sex trafficking than labor trafficking, but that's just my bias. I don't believe there are very many people, very many places that are not sexually active. And where you have humans, you have people that have sexual needs. And where you have buyers, you have the supply chain. So it's basic economics. So right now we've had more labor cases than we've had sex cases, but maybe that will change as more interdiction happens. But adults are trafficked, they're coerced, they're blackmailed into this. Somebody gets dirt on them, and they blackmail them. You know, I know you're stepping out on your wife. I know you've got a gambling problem. I know you use drugs. I know you're jipping work hours. I know you're sleeping on the job. I know you're using on the job. You do this for me, or I'm telling. And then pretty soon people are in the life. And that's how it happens. And if anybody gets dirt on you, if anybody can tear you down, they will. Another way is invite people to parties. I've had a whole group, swingers clubs and that kind of stuff. And to each their own. I'm not judging them. If you're a willing, consenting adult, have it. I'm okay. You're okay, whatever. But if you're coerced into that, or the people that are swinging beside you, if they're not there of their own free will, or they're being hired to swing, or they're coerced to swing or be part of those parties, I've got some victims that say they have to work at those parties.
Wow.
And other couples that'll say, we're not free to say no, so we have to service these parties. We have to go to these events. I've got adults who say, they're going to work the races this summer, so they're going to show up at all of our racetracks. They're going to work the private booths. They're going to deliver drinks, and then they'll do the after parties, and then they'll have to go home with people and service those people. And they're not free to say no. Can I prove it? Nope. I just hear the stories, And so, and it's not just the races. It's any fair. It's any club. It's any event. It's any location where you have people gathering. Everybody wants to say, oh, the Super Bowl. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not just the Super Bowl. It's any college game. It's any tailgate. It's anything like that where you have people coming together. You put campers together at a campground, and one of them's going to be set up where there's constant coming and going. And people say, there's constant traffic going in and out of that camper. I think they're selling drugs. You've got drugs, you've got trafficking. They're married because to move the drugs, you need the cash flow from the trafficking. And so you can only sell that drug once or twice, depending on how you cut it. You can sell that human body over and over and over and over and over. And so, it's just a constant cash flow. So where you have any of that activity in any situation, you've got trafficking, and it's all over. I've got traveling nurses that have come up to me after being trained and say, I'm being trafficked.
Wow.
This person that's got dirt on me, my spouse doesn't know, I'm being trafficked. I have to do these things on the job for these people. And I'm thinking, these are adult women. These are educated women. I've got people on college campuses. These are academia. There is no stereotype of this is your typical victim. It can be anybody. And, once they're in, it's hard to get out because somebody's got dirt on them.
And, when you're talking about it can be anybody and there is no specific type of person, how do you identify then if there's a child in your life or an adult in your life and you're thinking to yourself, something's not right? How do you specifically identify that person is being trafficked?
I never have. They've always told me. They identify them. And it's usually after I've done a training, and they'll come up to me and say, can I talk to you? Or I hand out my name or my business card and my phone number, and I say, I don't answer phone calls. You have to text me, or you find me. And they do. And that's how I've gotten to 230 some people. That's how people will come up to me and say, me too. Can you help me? Or this is my story. Or if I send you a letter, will you tell my story but never use my name? I want you to tell people this is how I was sucked in, but never tell them where I'm at or who's using me. But tell people this is what happened to me so that it doesn't happen to them. Yep. That's how people have done it. And that makes me the one talking, and they can stay quiet and hidden. And yet it's their story or their situation being shared. And that's how they're contributing to the education or the increasing of awareness. And I have agreed to do that for them for that reason, to increase awareness.
Are there any indicators, that people who are being trafficked show that, maybe that people who are listening, whether that be a parent or friend, can look for or try to identify, or does it really just kind of come out in conversation? Does it really come out in being personable and getting to know that person and making them know that, hey, I'm a safe space. You can be comfortable with me. I'm here for you.
I would tell you the biggest indicators are those kids, those adults that are erratic. They don't make good decisions. They're in and out. Some people call them hyper. They're always on the move. They never relax. Some people call them anxious. They're looking over their shoulder all the time. They've always got a phone in their hand, which sounds like every teenager on the planet, but not true. You hate to blame teenagers for everything, but they've got a phone in their hand. They're constantly checking that. They don't even go to the bathroom without a phone in their hand. But they're those people that do not have a turn off switch or a down switch or a relax switch, because they're on call or they're hyper vigilant to that phone, because that's how the pimp's going to reach them. That's how they're going to get called out, and they don't dare miss that call. Other signs, if there's drugs involved, I always look for those people. Erratic behavior, irrational thinking, fear, people that are afraid all the time are always looking over their shoulder. And I wonder, who are you afraid of? Who are you looking for? For my kids, I would they'd be with me, and we'd walk into a store, walk into a restaurant, and they'd stop. And I'd almost run into them, like run into the back of them or whatever. Or all at once I'd be talking, and they'd stop. And I'd turn around and go, and I'd just be like, all right. And then I'd say, round it up, we're out of here. And we'd go load up in the car and leave. And we'd get back in the car, and I'd say, somebody in there? And they'd say, yep. And they'd look like deer in the headlights. Okay? Sometimes it would be a cologne. Sometimes it would be a perfume. Sometimes it would be somebody sitting there. Okay? I wouldn't know typically till I had them safe and sound back in a car. As they healed, they could then walk into that restaurant or that establishment, and they would either be like glued to my hip or to the cart or wherever it was, and their proximity to my body let me know that there was somebody unsafe. And I'd just say, there's nobody that can touch you with me standing right here. And, over time, they learned to know that was truth. You know what I mean? But it took, and I got teenagers. I mean, my kids were big. And I thought, it took a while, but they got there. Okay? And, and I say that to people, guard your children. You know what I mean? It's a no-brainer. Your babies, babies 0 to 18 are the most precious gift you're going to get. They do not go unguarded. I mean, my oldest babies are 38. And if she's with me, I'm still going to guard her. And she's got an incredible husband and a beautiful daughter. And I'm still going to guard both of them. And none of them need me to do that. But I would, because it's just like your parent thing.
Yeah.
And so you, with your mom, you do the same thing. I don't know what it is about parents, but we all do this. I don't know if that goes away. But I think that is a gift. Use it. Us as parents, grandparents, man, that's a gift. Use that. So those are things that, when kids are healing or people are healing or they've been trafficked, they've come out of that, they give you those indicators. They learn to feel safe beside you, and they learn that you have their back. Once they learn that, they start sharing with you more and more and more. And it just starts happening. It becomes that natural reaction. But I would say the biggest indicators are the lack of safety, the always looking over their shoulder, the high anxiety, the hypervigilance, that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's going to be things like cutting. But I can't say that across the board, because there's thousands of people who cut that are not being trafficked. When I hear somebody is cutting, okay, when I hear that, if I'm the social worker that's nearby, my first question isn't, why are you cutting? Okay, because duh.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Why am I asking that? My first question is, are you unsafe?
Mm.
And then I look at their eyes. I'm watching their eyes because I am going for safety. And my next thing is, what did your body do wrong?
Mm.
But I want to know. You don't hurt your body if you think your body did something right. So I want to know what you think your body did wrong.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and as somebody who actually has a history of self-harming myself, that definitely hits close to home, and just that question of, what did your body do wrong, absolutely hits close to home. And so, as somebody who has done that in the past, I appreciate how you, handle that situation and go about that.
Yep, because I just think that's the most respectful way I can do that. Because what I want that person to hear from me is, you're perfect, and that body's perfect. And you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They've got to hear that, one of the things I had to teach my sex trafficking victims is sex feels good to everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if this was taken from my children because they were victimized, they're going to grow up, they're going to fall in love, they're going to get married. And I don't want them to take that away from themselves or their spouse or their lives because they think their body did something wrong. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So they have to come back into their world and say, you know what? Just because this moment was taken from them at some point, they have the right to reclaim that moment and gift that moment and their choice of who at whatever point they want to choose and gift. That's theirs. Because that was never taken. They get to still do that to whomever, whenever, their timing. And that's something you go back and teach.
Yes, it's like somebody who's, been through a sexual assault or a rape.
Yep.
It's like you have to, especially if that was their first time, for example, explaining to them, that wasn't your choice. That wasn't something that now is going to be something that identifies who you are and what you do for the rest of your life. You still have that opportunity to give that gift to somebody else and enjoy it later on. But I can't even imagine, as somebody who also has a history of sexual assault and everything else, it was hard for me to, move past that and, have sex with other people after that. But going from that, from a being trafficked set as well, especially when it might be people that you thought were in your life or put in your life to protect you or to lean on or that you could talk to, and they portrayed you like that, it is a completely other level of that.
Correct. Yep. And just reteaching them, giving them that gift back and letting them know they get to give that gift, their choice, their timing, their decision, whenever. It's all about empowerment. It's all their gift. It's their body. It's their life. And it's just a matter of getting them back to that. Because that's, what somebody takes isn't what you gave. And your body didn't do that. And so you just give that back and reteach that. And it's just part of that. I call it parenting. Other people call it whatever they call it. But I think, as a mom, I want my kids to have the very best they can have in their world and their relationships and their lives. And I want them to carry that forward. So, just so these, the adults get that, the kids get that, that's all part of that. But I look for that in people. But I can't say it across the board. These are the things that indicate for me, other than those things that I've mentioned to you, that hypervigilance, that fear, that stuff. That screams somebody's chasing me.
And you talked about how you've interviewed over 230 survivors of trafficking. Can you tell me and my listeners a story that has stuck with you throughout the years of you doing this?
Yeah, the one that really haunts me, the one that haunts me, and I cannot prove this, but the one that was from a survivor, and she talked about being invited onto a farm that had outbuildings, and there was a person that they had been sold beside that had talked to a mandatory reporter, and they don't know what was said or not said, but anyhow, she was put in the middle of a circle, and it was called like a stoning circle. So like I'm biblical, so it's like that's what my vision of this was, but everybody surrounded this person, and they had to beat on this person or kick or hit at this person.
Wow.
This person in the middle of this circle who had spoken to a mandatory reporter or to somebody they were not allowed to speak to, right? Their bestie, their best friend, or somebody that was in this sex ring was given a revolver, and they spun the revolver, okay, the barrel of the revolver, and the person that they trusted the most was handed the revolver, and they had to put that revolver to the head of that person and pull the trigger.
Wow.
And the gun always goes off, and that person dies. Okay? And everybody in that circle witnesses it. So they're all colluding to that crime, right? And that body is taken away, and it is incinerated on this farm that happens to have cattle. It's got an incinerator, and if it can incinerate a 2,000-pound steer, it can incinerate a 180-pound body, right? And I can't prove that happened, but when the ashes come out of that incinerator, those ashes are spread on the field, and the pimp calls that field the Kathy field, or the Sally field, or the Shelby field, or the whatever.
Wow.
From then on. And it's a way to keep that sex ring from speaking out of turn to people that are heroes like mandatory reporters. Well, I'm a mandatory reporter, right? When I have heard that story from 3 different survivors.
Wow.
3 different victims, and all 3 of those girls will say they believe that is a true story in their journey. That person was dead. That person was incinerated. That person is no longer walking the earth. They are dead. And they witnessed it. And that's why they never spoke. That's why they don't tell their story. They don't talk. They don't travel. They don't do anything. And that happened here in Iowa.
Wow.
And I can't prove it, but that haunts me because I don't know how to fix stuff like that. And you just think, okay, but if you were there and you witnessed that, and that's what you're threatened with, or that's icky, okay? Another along that same thing is you've heard the TV show that Fear Factor.
Yes.
Okay. Think about setting up Fear Factor parties and having the people you buy be the ones that get the snakes dumped on them or the tarantulas dumped on them or whatever. And that be you invite guests to your house and you have bought people that you enjoy striking fear into. Or maybe you want to hunt people. So and this is another story, supposedly it happened south of Des Moines. Okay, there's somebody that owns land, and the person was set free at this corner of the land, and they were to make it blah, 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 and they were hunted.
Wow.
All night. And if they made it to this part of whatever, they would only be raped by one person. But if they didn't make it, then they had to be raped by 15 people.
Oh,
well, nobody ever made it, so they all got raped by 15 people, right? It's a no-win situation. And, you know, you hear enough of those kind of stories, you just sit there and think, what kind of sick people do we have in the world? And yet all of this stuff comes off of reality TV. And after hearing this stuff from victims, I cannot watch reality TV.
Yeah.
I can't turn it on. I can't. There's no humor to it. It's not funny to me. It just makes me feel sick to my stomach. So when I see it, I think, wow, wonder how a pimp's going to turn that. Wonder how somebody's going to use that against somebody. That's how my mind goes.
Well, it makes me think of Law and Order, the SVU, Special Victims Unit, because I've watched that show before, and it makes me think that, you know, when you're talking about people draw inspiration from television, I mean, that show is, I mean, you've got to think that so many people are probably drawing their inspiration